Good afternoon. This is Rosa Mendez from DEC's Environmental Justice Office. We are going to get started in just one other minute. We have some working group members about to sign on. Thanks. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Why don't we go ahead and get the meeting started. So Alex, if you don't mind advancing us to the agenda slide. We'll start with introducing everyone who's on the call. Again, my name is Rosa Mendez. I'm the Director of the Office of Environmental Justice for DEC, and I'm going to go across the screen as I see names for introductions. Joe McNerney.
Hello, this is Joe McNerney, Director of External Stakeholder Engagement at the New York State Department of Labor.
Hi, Joe. And then Chris Cole.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Chris Cole from NYSERDA. I'm the Director for Energy Affordability and Equity.
Hi, Chris. And next I have Elizabeth.
Buenos días, Elizabeth Jean-Pierre from Uprose in Sunset Park, Brooklyn.
Hello. And next I have Jared.
Jared Bly. Are you asking me, Rosa?
Oh, no, we're just doing introductions. And next on my screen, I see Rawa.
Good afternoon, Rawa Gurmadzian, Director at Push Buffalo.
And then Abigail.
Hi, Abby McHugh-Griffa, Climate Solutions Accelerator for Genesee Finger Lakes region.
And next I see Neil. Hey, Neil, we can't hear you. All right, with us today, we also have from DEC, Alana. Alana, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Alana Cadell-Tuckey. I am the Public Outreach Specialist for the Office of Environmental Justice at the DEC.
And we have with us today our consultants, Alex and Amanda. You want to give a little intro?
Hi, my name is Alex Dunn. I am a director at Illum Advising.
And this is Amanda Dwelly at Illum Advising, everyone.
Hello. And then with us, we also have Samir. Samir, you want to do your intro?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Samir Wanade, Climate Justice Advisor with the Climate Action Council. Great to see everybody.
Great. Thanks, Samir. And then we also have today with us for the next part of our agenda, Sarah Osgood. Sarah, do you want to give your introduction and then we can get into your update?
Sure. Hi, I'm Sarah Osgood, Executive Director of the Climate Action Council. Thank you for having me here today.
Great, thank you, Sarah. And I don't think you have slides for your update. So if you wanted to jump in and give us your update on the Climate Action Council.
Hi, everybody. Just want to jump. Can you hear me? This is Neil.
Oh, hi, Neil. Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, great. I apologize for the technical difficulties. I don't have camera today, but I was obviously also having trouble with audio too. So I'm here.
All right, good to hear you.
All right. Sure. I'd be happy to jump in. So thank you for taking or for giving me a little bit of time to speak to you today. I know you're busy and I don't want to take up too much time, so I'll jump in. Really, I'm here today to just deliver the message that the Climate Action Council wants your input, and we want to work with you to facilitate that. And so it can be on specific recommendations, as you've provided feedback on some of the panels so far. And it could also be more general, as you've also already provided with the climate justice framework. I know you're scheduled to give feedback on the Power Generation Advisory Panel recommendations at this Thursday's Climate Action Council meeting, and we're looking forward to that. But we've also got a meeting on the calendars, a hold on the meeting, a hold on CAC member calendars for August. And there we could provide you with additional time to give feedback on the remaining recommendations. If that works for you, it would also be wonderful to hear an update on the draft disadvantaged communities criteria, if it's ready to go at that time or at subsequent meetings. I know you're also aware that the council is tasked with releasing a draft scoping plan by January 1, 2022. Right now, we've got a lot of modeling work, what we're calling the integration analysis, that is ongoing, and that's going to inform the council's deliberations towards that due date as well. Going forward, I would expect the council meetings to involve significant review and discussion of the integration analysis and discussion around how it's going to inform the scoping plan. And so this is another area, development of the scoping plan, in which we'd like to, and also acknowledge is required by statute, to incorporate your input. We know you're stretched with the work that you have in front of you with just the Climate Justice Working Group tasks that are directly your responsibility, but we'd still like to explore with you the best means to gather your input, and so we welcome your input on how to engage, while we can also meet the statutorily required deadlines. For now, what we've done is we've assumed that we'd have Climate Justice Working Group input at each of the CAC meetings that would go through November. So August, if you're willing and interested, as well as September, October, and November. And we can work further with you to determine exactly what that would look like and if that works for you. But I also just wanted to touch on the level of detail in the scoping plan. I'd call it more of a strategy document that provides a basis on which to act on a policy recommendation. So like the recommendations that were provided by the advisory panels, I don't think the scoping plan will be high level. It won't get into a lot of the implementation details that I think a lot of folks are kind of looking for. But every policy that does ultimately advance from the scoping plan has to go through its own regulatory process. And so I would just, kind of offer it out there that this isn't kind of the only chance to shape the policies. We definitely do want your input now, but this is not, we wouldn't consider this a one and done situation. Also, I'll just point out our emissions reductions requirements. They are challenging, and I expect that they'll likely, need to have, everything on the table that we can to meet those goals. And so I just encourage you, as you're taking a look at the recommendations of the panel, of the advisory panels, and providing feedback, that if there are policy alternatives that that you'd prefer over the ones that appear to be advancing, it would be helpful to identify those and the features of them that make them more desirable, or to suggest how to improve the policies that have been recommended, rather than to just eliminate them from consideration. You could also identify potential equity pitfalls that we must guard against. But I guess bottom line is, we will need your help as these policies advance through the scoping plan development. We recognize you're busy, but we want to hear from you to help shape the scoping plan. And so I'd really love to explore what specifically that engagement could look like with you guys. That's basically all I wanted to say. I'm happy to take any questions on that, though. I'm not sure if we've set aside time in the meeting here to get into a lot of discussion around what the engagement would look like. I'm happy to do that here or to take it offline. But it is something that we really want to figure out how we can make it work for both the Climate Justice Working Group members as well as the Climate Action Council members.
Sarah, are there any questions from the working group members?
I just have one quick question, Elizabeth. As we provide you with recommendations and input, what is the timeline for you to report back on whether that has been integrated, whether there are challenges? For us, it would be terrible to hear at the end of a long process that 50% of the recommendations haven't been integrated. Will you be communicating with us regularly and letting us know? Just really important as we move forward.
Absolutely, we can absolutely do that. I would say that just in terms of a general timeline, and we will get into this more at the Climate Action Council meeting on Thursday as well. So I encourage you to tune in to that full meeting as well, not just the portion that you folks are providing your input on. But the general schedule is we're looking to have a draft scoping plan that would, an initial draft scoping plan that would be ready to go to the Climate Action Council members for review by about mid-October. And then there would be about a month or so for review. And we got to kind of figure out exactly the mechanisms for how we're going to gather the various feedback from the council members. But then to get to a revised draft scoping plan by the first half of December, so that we would be prepared to act on that by the end of the year to release that. And so I guess I would say there's no specific kind of deadline, you must get it in by this time in order for it. It's kind of, this is a little bit of a fluid process, and we want to work with you to make sure we've got your input in there. But I would say a lot of the work over September and October will be, for the council, will be discussing the integration analysis and trying to understand what that means and how it's going to inform what we ultimately put in the scoping plan.
Rosa, Eddie, I have a question.
Go ahead, Eddie.
Hi, and thanks, Sarah. And again, apologies, I missed the first few minutes of the meeting, so I'm not sure if this was addressed. I'm a little confused. confused ain't the right word. I think I'm a little disturbed on multiple levels, but what I'm a little worried about is what feels to me as a working group member moving goalposts. And I'm not speaking for anyone but myself as a working group member. I remember the first time it dawned on us, or we were told directly that there was the expectations that as the working group we would opine on the recommendations. It felt to me the first time we learned this was like in May, and then since then there've been, it seems to me, 3 different timelines or 3 different contexts within which we would be expected to give our feedback. At first glance, I thought we were being told, yeah, you guys will be able to present to the Climate Action Council at a series of meetings coming up. We don't know which ones when, but that was when we first learned about our feedback responsibilities. And then it felt to me like there were 3 Climate Action Council meetings, July, September, and possibly later ones in the fall. Then the third version of this was we're only going to have 2 opportunities to give feedback, July and September. And at that point, I think as the working group, we were like, okay, if we're not going to be able to verbally give our feedback on all the different subgroup or working group or advisory group recommendations, then we would do what we can in the 2 options that were being offered to us, and that the rest would be given in a written report. Now what I'm hearing is that we may have yet another opportunity in August and possibly October and maybe November. So I don't know if any of the other working group members are processing it this way, but it feels to me like whack-a-mole. Like just when I'm settled on, okay, time frame, this is what we have available to us. This is how we plan to give our feedback in a way where the working group shares with each other our analysis, and then we arrive at a place that we think reflects the consensus of the working group. That alone is a bit of a process. And to do that, thinking we only have 2 opportunities and 3 opportunities, now 4 or 5 opportunities, it's really confusing. And it's not just confusing, but it makes the planning that we do in order to do our regular day jobs, plus this, plus the rest of the working group responsibilities, it's next to impossible to effectively plan if our feedback opportunities keep changing. So I don't know if anyone else has experienced it this way. I have, and I think I need to know, like, are you guys going to be able to give us at least a firm sense of how many Climate Action Council opportunities will we have to give feedback? Because then at least then we can organize ourselves better and identify which working groups, because it's the analysis of these working group recommendations and then our internal consulting with each other that takes the most time. But if we're told we only have 2 opportunities versus 6 opportunities, that changes the timing, the time management calculus on our end. So let me stop there. I don't know if anyone else in the working group has a similar reaction, but more importantly, I guess, is, what certainty can we get of how many Climate Action Council meetings we will be allowed to present? And can that be like a firm number, or will that number keep changing as well? I'll stop there. And I have one other thing about I heard something about our recommendations should not be necessarily promoting alternatives to the recommendations that are being, I don't know, yeah, maybe I misunderstood. So if I could get some clarity about what not charge, but what guidance we're being given now about what to say and not say about these recommendations. I thought I saw some guidance, but maybe I misunderstood it. So let me stop there.
Okay, so first of all, I'll just apologize for any confusion. This is a challenging process for everyone involved, I think. And what we've tried to do is we're trying to be flexible in real time, and so there was, I guess, originally in the planning, there was thinking that we would have the Climate Justice Working Group feedback on all the advisory panel recommendations, and that would come in the June and July timeframe, whether it would be at meetings or in a written form. I understand that, you know, if we look at in terms of the number of meetings that we have and the number of panels where you still need to provide, or you still have the opportunity to provide feedback on the recommendations from, we're really trying to accommodate your schedule, and how do we want to accommodate your schedule while also maintaining the overall schedule of getting a draft plan out by the first of the year. And so we're happy to work with you, I would guess I would say. If you want to provide written feedback as opposed to presenting at the meetings, that's completely fine. We can discuss that. Or if it's more convenient to provide verbal feedback at the meetings, we can try to do that. I will say we've encouraged feedback on the recommendations by the end of August. And largely that's driven by the work of the integration analysis and development of the scoping plan. We think it's going to take a lot of attention, a lot of the council members' attention. And so we wanted to make sure that the considerations from your working group are also, you know, considered alongside all of this. So that's kind of one point. I would say the feedback that the time that we've reserved tentatively for at the remaining meetings this year of the council for the climate justice working group feedback, we've done that as a, I guess, for lack of a better term, a placeholder, saying we want your input. We can make this space. I think we were not thinking it would necessarily be directly on the recommendations, that you would continue providing feedback on the recommendations. We'd really hope that you could have the feedback on the recommendations that were already advanced by the advisory panel, if we could get that feedback by the end of August. But I know that you're also working on the disadvantaged communities criteria. So we can work with you, I guess, to figure out the best way in terms of what is the method of sharing your comments and the time frame. But I guess kind of the sooner the better is kind of where we are with that.
So I have similar concerns to Eddie, and I think it's because when you really want frontline BIPOC guidance and input, you have to make a special accommodation because we don't run multi-million-dollar organizations. And so you have to be aware that we don't have that kind of capacity, which is the reason why the state often defers to the big greens, right? But I digress. What I want to say, though, is that I'd like to see how the recommendations, and I apologize if I haven't seen it, if it hasn't been clear to me, how the recommendations that are coming out of the council are aligned with climate justice priorities. I want to see the recommendation, but I also want to see something that says, this is how it's aligned with a just transition. This is how it's aligned with climate justice. This is how it's aligned with the recommendations that are coming out of the climate justice working group. And then of course, it's going to be necessary for us to have some sort of timeline so that if there isn't quick shifting that feels like it's arbitrary, because that's going to be important for us to be able to pace our work. But yeah, it'd be great if you could do that.
I have a question. This is Rawa. Yeah, I think just to add to, or a continuation of what Eddie and Elizabeth are saying, is that you talked a little bit about, possibly having an offline conversation with you, Sarah, to talk about what is the engagement and what is the process. And one of the things that I think is really important too is we are trying to be very intentional for how we're giving the recommendations. on each of the panel advisory bodies. And we're trying to give them to you in bite-sized chews, right? So we're being very intentional. We're doing a pretty deep analysis. And I think what would be helpful to us in consideration of our time and the amount of work that is expected from us is if you could give us that feedback kind of in a similar way where we're not going to get all 8 or 9 recommendations at the same time and try to find the time, to read them, is to give it to us 1, 2 at a time, sort of in real time, so that we have an opportunity to then, if there's a different set of, additional recommendations or edits or suggestions, that we give those right back to you in a timely fashion as well, so that this thing can keep moving forward. We appreciate the timeline. We understand that everybody is under the same sort of constraints to meet the draft scoping plan. And then I think another thing that would be very helpful is if we could have a meeting to fully flesh out what our process and engagement is going to be. And then, creating the timeline for when we can set these expectations with each other as part of that meeting would be, I think, incredibly helpful and then less confusing, because we are trying to move through so many hurdles to, accommodate everyone. And it just feels like it's just a little bit too much. And when the sort of, when the shifts and changes are happening in real time, it kind of just, it just creates really situations that are too much for us.
Okay.
Quick, just a follow up to, and I don't know if the other working group members, I think I saw Jared post something, so it'd be great to hear what Jared had to say. I part of what's worrying me is I just heard Elizabeth and Rawa share recommendations for how we can work better together, and I'm afraid that some of us as working group members are operating under a mistaken assumption. Based on what I heard Elizabeth and Rawa say, it seems like some working group members expect that there will be some response from the Climate Action Council to our feedback. And I hope that's true. I suspect that it's not. I suspect that the Climate Action Council is not going to, either formally or in bite size or however, like, I don't believe the Climate Action Council feels like they have to respond to our recommendations. If that's accurate, it would be helpful for us as working group members to know this, so that so we can manage our own expectations and know that our feedback is essentially one way and nothing is going to be coming back our way in terms of what's going to be done with our recommendations, right? Or our analysis of the recommendations. And I do want to flag one other thing. I think that there may be a little bit of a disconnect between how some of us see what a climate justice working group's mandate is and how maybe the Climate Action Council sees it. As for me, I see the Climate Justice Working Group responsibility as analyzing the recommendations that came from these working groups and sharing with the Climate Action Council how these recommendations further, are neutral, or actually impede climate justice. And for example, in the transportation feedback, we identified some recommendations that clearly have disparate impacts on frontline communities. What happens when a climate justice working group tells a Climate Action Council, hey, recommendation XYZ is actually going to increase emissions or hurt people of color? I can't, it's hard for me to feature the Climate Action Council not having some affirmative responsibility to take that feedback and fix the recommendation so it doesn't have a disparate impact. And by the way, like, I get all this is happening under the crunch of time, but I think that the offline conversation is necessary, because what I'm hearing is different people having different ideas of what the interplay between the Climate Justice Working Group and the Climate Action Council is and isn't. And frankly, part of what would make our lives a lot easier is if we knew what the Climate Action Council's schedule is between now and the end of the year. That's been what's been, I think, really unsettling about this process, is that we're being asked to do all this work over the summer, right? When Climate Action Council members, God bless them, are on vacation, doing whatever they got to do. But all this work is expected us over the summer. Yet meanwhile, I have no idea when the Climate Action Council is meeting in October, November, and December. At the very least, there should be a public meeting schedule that everyone knows. If the time pressure and crunch is so urgent, why is the Climate Action Council just doling out when it's meeting month by month, as opposed to saying between now and December 31st, this is when the Climate Action Council is meeting. So I'm just hearing like a lot of, I think, different ideas of how we're all working together. And all of it, I think, is adding up to a bit of a hot mess. And so let me stop there.
Yeah, I would add that it would be a disaster, to be honest, if the Climate Action Council got itself in the position of hearing what we have to say, because that's what a lot of advisory groups do. They hear what frontline community leaders are telling them as a way of pacifying and managing us. That would be a big, big mistake. And so we need to hear back how those recommendations are being integrated and that they are priorities, that we're not just giving stuff up for the sake of giving the patina of the governor's office or the DEC integrating climate justice into decision-making. It has to be real. And so it has to be documented, and the process has to honor that, and the timeline has to honor it. And so I agree completely with Eddie and with Rawa. That is the fear. And I think that it shouldn't just be a fear on our side. It should also be a fear on your side, because if you do that, then the body loses authenticity. So I just want to make sure that there is the political will to do something that is radically different than other advisory groups have done through the entire United States and in the history of governance, which has been, let's put together a body, let's bring all the people who are problems, let's hear what they have to say, and then say, well, we heard you, and we decided in our wisdom that this is what's in your best interest. So I just want to flag that can be a real problem.
Okay. All this feedback is great, and I think it's leading to, we definitely need to have a conversation about how best to engage. And so I'm happy to do that anytime. I don't know that we want to take up too much more time of this meeting. But I would just say, I think this was to one of Eddie's points. If there are, my reference to policies and recommendations to make them better, that was, I just wanted to follow up on that question of yours. I'm not saying if you have alternative policy ideas, you shouldn't put them forward. I'm saying we do want those alternative policies put forward, but also to understand why those are preferred over other mechanisms. And if we can aim for kind of the outcomes, like to understand the outcomes that we're looking to get to, and not just, the specific kind of mechanism, because I think in a lot of mechanisms, you can design them to look like different things too. And so really, a lot of it comes down to the actual details there. And so we want to make sure that I would say the feedback that you provide is not just saying this doesn't work or this doesn't meet the kind of the test here. This doesn't kind of satisfy equity principles. Certainly we want to know that, but we want to know, but you could add this component or this policy to complement it to help kind of flesh it out a little bit. And so maybe I could just ask Rosa and Chris and Samir if you could help maybe arrange a time for us to kind of discuss with the working group members different mechanisms and paths forward on this, because I think this is going to be really important. And it should go without saying, but I'll say it anyway. We do want the scoping plan to take seriously the equity considerations and to be genuine and not just lip service. So that I feel like we are aligned in that, and we've got to figure out the best way to make that happen.
Sarah, this is Rawa. I just want to say we hear you and we appreciate that a follow-up meeting is going to happen, but I think it's going to be critical that at that meeting, the question of this mutual sort of feedback, right? We gave some feedbacks. Are we going to get a response from the CAC? Needs to be the first item on the agenda, because then I think that will dictate for us how we move forward. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Sarah,
Thank you, Sarah. Oh, go ahead, Eddie.
I'm sorry, one last, I didn't hear an answer to this, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, because I think I've heard this on several previous working group meetings, is there a public schedule of when the Climate Action Council is meeting from now until the end of the year? If there is not, I think the Climate Justice Working Group would like to, and fellow working group members, if I've overstepped, tell me and I'll withdraw but I think we would like to encourage the Climate Action Council strongly to do the hard work, calendar your meetings between now and the end of December, make it public so everyone knows the Climate Action Council is meeting the third Thursday, or whatever it is. But like this thing of constantly shifting meetings, not knowing how many meetings are left in a statutorily driven process where 5 months remain is just, I have no understanding why that's not happened yet. And so is there a public meeting scheduled for the Climate Action Council from now until the end of the year? And if not, can you please pass along our strong request that the Climate Action Council do so?
Absolutely, I will pass along the request. We do have meeting holds put on Climate Action Council member calendars through October, and happy to share those publicly, and posting them publicly on the website seems to make a lot of sense too. And so we will definitely share those with you and work to schedule the remaining meetings in November and December, and also include that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sarah, this is.
All right, thank you, Sarah.
I got one.
Oh, sorry, Jared.
Yeah, one comment. Sorry, this is Jared Bly. I kind of missed my cue at the introduction, but I'm with the Adirondack North Country Association. I share Eddie, Elizabeth, and Rawa's concerns about the timeline, and to be able to answer the question, is this going to be a bi-directional process, whether or not we get feedback on our analysis and critique of the recommendation sets, is going to be important, because that, if the Climate Action Council does respond and we need to respond again in a different iteration, that's going to add time to our process. And so we need to account for that in our own timeline, not only the remaining sets of recommendations, but now this additional layer or level of work that is imposed on us. So if we could get a clear answer on that piece so that we can adjust accordingly, that would be really helpful for everyone's time, because as many people point out, it has taken up outside of our day jobs to do this work. We recognize it's super important, and we are happy to do it, I think, for the most part, but having a really solid understanding of that timeline is going to be crucial to the success of this.
And Rosa, I'm sure you're trying to move us along, so I apologize. And Sarah, thank you for being here. I really do appreciate the time you're taking today and helping us understand this context. One other thing I just want to nudge you on a little bit is a question that Elizabeth brought up when we presented it to the council before that I'd really love some clarity on, maybe when we next have a chance to talk. And that was the question of what is the framework that the Climate Action Council is using, kind of an overarching method of thinking about systems change and what systems change requires. And there were two that Elizabeth mentioned, the Just Transition Framework, and then also the Water for Systems Change. So, I know you have this integration analysis coming up, or going on, I guess, and we've had a lot of questions about like how that works, what that means. But yeah, how do we know if we're achieving the systems level change that is needed, and that all the pieces kind of align within that? So just wanted to bring that up again. Thanks.
All right, thank you. I'm assuming that that's not a question for on the spot because I don't have a good answer for you right now on that. But this is all great to know to prep for a future meeting here. So thank you. And Rosa, I guess I'll turn it back over to you.
Great, thank you, Sarah. And working group members, since you are already talking about timelines, we'll move to the next part of our agenda where we wanted to just refresh on the timeline we're working with for the criteria development to get us to draft, and so that we can start our public engagement process on that draft. So you've seen this calendar before. What we have are some bullets underneath the weeks of potential meetings, because I know we're still trying to pin down when we are meeting in August to continue going over the criteria development. And so what we as the ILLUME team and the state team supporting the working group wanted to touch base on is, one, reflection on the calendar and our goals for having public engagement beginning in September. Also teeing up for you when we think would be the appropriate time to meet the timing for September for you all to vote on the indicators/criteria that we are using and the scenarios that we would present. So we have all of that listed here. What we also wanted to know from you all is how would be best for the state staff team and ILLUME to support you, to help you feel confident as you move into, we are going to vote on these indicators and we are going to vote on these scenarios. And I know we've done a few ground truthing exercises, but we are open to how else we can get you to that confidence that so that you feel like the indicators reflect what you were thinking of for disadvantaged communities, and the scenario also reflects what you envision for a methodology for identifying the geographic locations. So Chris, Alex, and Amanda and I are here, and Samir as well, to answer any questions. You'll see on the timeline that we're trying to get 2 meetings, one in the week of August, is that a 9? Yeah, August 9, and then one in the week where it begins August 16th. And then potentially if we had to push it back to later weeks in August, those are other options. It could be an optional meeting for anyone who wants a more in-depth individual indicator review.
I want to add to this one quick thing, just so you know. I mean, Amanda today is going to go through in depth kind of our documentation that you will be getting after this, which is all the indicators we've considered and kind of what we're thinking. And so you're going to get a lot of information. We wanted to run through it and discuss it with you today. And then you get more fun time maps with Alex later on today too. And I have a feeling that that's kind of going to be the way that we continue to go as we like drill down into this. But to Rosa's point, whatever we want to make this the process that is the easiest for you. So if you need us to go into the techie nerdy details, we can. If you'd rather see the maps and compare and contrast, we can do that. We can facilitate the conversation where I get the ground truthing from you, and then we show how we're reflecting that information you've just given us back. All of that is on the table, and it really just would love your thoughts. We also recognize, again, it's crazy busy time, and especially for you guys. So whatever we can do to make it the easiest for you to come to a decision, that is what we will do.
So any initial reaction? Oh, go ahead. I think I heard Eddie.
Oh, somebody else was saying, I'm talking, I'm sorry. I did have something, but somebody else had spoken up.
That was just Chris. Sorry about that. So I was just going to ask Rosa, the other I guess, big consideration when it comes to the schedule is the voting process, and needing to make sure that people, we have a quorum in order to to vote. So could you speak a little bit more? And I don't know if Eddie, you want to go first, but at some point, Rosa, could you speak a little bit more on what that process needs to look like, so that way, we can work with everyone's schedules?
Yeah, just to piggyback on Chris, I mean, I don't know about the rest of the working group members. Russ, I'm a little confused about this, right? Because there's a lot of potential activities, plus decision points, plus the votes, plus the public, and so I'm grateful that you guys are putting this in this timeline that we've seen before. But what would be, I think, helpful for me is if maybe we can work our way backwards. Like, what is the final date for action from us? And then if we could kind of work our way backwards, because I don't know about the rest of the working group members. I have no sense of what the public, I know that our recommendations are going to go out for public comment. I have no clue of what the public meetings are supposed to, like, what is the expectations from that? Is it, us engaging with the public? Like, it would be really helpful for us to have a sense of that part of it also, because I worry that if we just worry about like the immediate tasks ahead of us, we may be missing, one of the more exciting parts of this, which is like engaging with New Yorkers about this stuff.
Right.
But I don't know what that means or what that looks like. And I don't know if others do. So it'd be great if we could work our way backwards but Chris's point is right on. Like, I think we need a little bit more so that we can then, because it sounds like there's a lot of expectations for August. And for most of humanity, people take like August is like a vacation. I'm not saying that we are taking vacations. I'm just saying that some of us might be. And if all of this is coming together in August, I already see a train wreck. So let me just stop there. Sorry.
So working backwards, when we initially met over a year ago as a working group, we set up that we wanted to have the draft ready for public comment in the summer. And we did push that back to, we can accomplish it if we do the public comment period during September. And the reason for the September push is because per the legislation, we have to have 120 days for the public comment period. And for us to achieve our initial goal of having the final by the end of the year, or January of next year, to accommodate that 120 days, that's why we're saying September is when we want to engage the public. In order to do that, we would like to provide something for the public to react to. And so from the legislation, we know that's the draft. And for you all, going back to identifying what are the decision points, what we are teeing up is we have to have consensus on what are the indicators that are in the definition. So that's going to be a vote for you all. And then two is taking those indicators you've agreed on and agreeing on the methodology, or as Alex refers to them, the scenarios for how you combine the indicators to identify the geographic location. And that is what the public will then give us feedback on. And in terms of what that could look like, DEC has the responsibility per the legislation of facilitating this public engagement. That said, we would love to have the working group members interacting with the public as well. And what we talked about earlier with this group is doing some combination of having a virtual education session where we can display the indicators, display the mapping that shows us the scenario, and tell everyone, this is how we got here. These are the indicators. This is why they were chosen. This is what the map looks like. That wouldn't be a typical public comment period where we just hear from the public. That would be us explaining what happened, more of the education side. Then we could do the 6 required public comment hearings in the more traditional style where we show up, do a very brief, usually we try to keep this to 10 minutes explanation of why we're all here. And then anyone in the audience who wants to give comments has between 2 and 3 minutes to tell us their comments, and they can submit written comments, and all of that is compiled by the state, and we will then react to those comments as part of getting to the final, the final definitions that we will also share. So that's the kind of broad strokes. We can do those public comment hearings in different ways, and what Alana and I would like to do is work with working group members for your communities. Where we should host them is a hybrid virtual versus physical better, those kinds of things. Now that we are no longer operating under suspended rules, we can do physical locations for these public comment hearings. So DEC is working on the plan for that. It's something that we can bring to the working group for your feedback on the plan we put forward, but something that we can also discuss. In terms of August, moving backwards in time, to get there, we know that we talked about these indicators, but what today was going to encompass is, we know that there's so many indicators, it's kind of hard to keep track of what was discussed, what left us, what was included in the mapping. And so today, Amanda is going to walk through, these were all the indicators we talked about as a group, and their status, whether they were continued on or whether there was some reason we could not include them in the methodology. And she'll also be talking about how those indicators relate with each other, so that if there was a concept you as a working group member really wanted in this calculus, why one indicator is a better representation than another, and why one was included and why wasn't. So we're going to do a lot of that today. And then the document that Amanda has put a lot of time into will be shared with you for further review offline. And then you can, it's part of the documentation also for us to be transparent to the public as well, that this is everything we talked about as a group, and this is how we got to the final set of indicators. So you'll be seeing a lot of that today. And in August, the plan was to get to consensus on that set of indicators. So that's what we were envisioning for the first August meeting, for you all to talk, get to consensus, and then tee up when we would vote on those indicators. And now I'll get to Chris's question, which is, for us to be able to vote, we have to have a quorum of the working group members present to be able to do that. And by present, that means in person at a physical location. And so that's why, when I sent out the poll, I wanted you to keep that in mind, that there may be travel associated depending on, but we can host multiple sites. And that's what we're trying to do, is have multiple in-person sites for the purposes of voting. And so the vision we had, and it is aggressive, is that you would come to consensus on the indicators and then have a follow-up meeting where you would vote and make it official that these are the indicators we are using for the draft. Very similar process for the scenarios. You will see the scenarios. We will have lots of time and opportunity to talk about those scenarios with Alex, come to consensus on them, and then tee up a vote at a later meeting for moving those scenarios forward to talk about with the public engagement. And I know that was a lot, so I'm happy to go back and get your reactions to all of that. And yes, Abigail, I see in-person input opportunity here in Rochester. Go ahead, Chris.
Hey, Rosa. One other point, just to kind of tie it back to Eddie's, question about, starting at the end. I think the other thing, just to kind of remind us all, is as we think about the interdependencies of the various work streams under the benefits and investments and the criteria, we're not going to be able to start tracking, the benefits or investments to communities, to the communities we're identifying through this process until we get that, public input session complete and get the criteria finalized. So, as we're kind of thinking about this, there are a few different, additional priorities and work streams that are then dependent on us getting through the public statement or input process. So, just to kind of remind folks that, that there's some additional work streams that are tied to this work as well.
Thanks, Chris, for that reminder. So I think if there are no more questions or feedback on the timeline, I know Amanda has her indicator discussion teed up, so let's make a commitment, Alana, you and I, that we'll have the plan for the public engagement in a written document so everyone can react to that as well for the next time we meet in August.
Okay, absolutely.
And also a quick question, the in-person, the vote, like the action that triggers the public process. Do you guys have, is there a specific, more or less a specific date in September where you guys did the calculation of the 120 days? Like, because September 6th is Labor Day, so I'm assuming we're not talking about that day, but is there like an actual day in September that is the date we should be shooting for the vote?
So I'll have to revisit the math on that. I know we had plotted it out earlier, but I don't have it in front of me, but I'll definitely make sure when I email you the next steps from today's meeting that I include those exact dates.
And I do want to empathize with you guys and really recognize and acknowledge that with the CAC stuff that I think is also like easier to react to, right? It's like it's policy stuff that you can say like, no, you're wrong. What we're asking you to do is different in a lot of ways because it's kind of like, oh my God, I have to think about this like crazy histogram and box plot and decisions on this and that and the other. And there's like, it's a giant moving thing and I get it, it's hard. So as you think through this, as you think about what you want to do and how you want to communicate to the communities, we welcome, like we're here and we want to work with you on it. And know that we're also trying to figure out how to streamline this process. So like reviewing the indicators, and again, Amanda has worked really hard on trying to be like, here's the big thing that you need to look at, and here's what's really important. And I'm going to be doing the same thing for the scenarios. So after today, what we're hoping to do is update based on your feedback, come back again on the 27th and give you an updated set of scenarios and an update on where we are with indicators so that we feel confident with the indicators for voting in that next meeting when that public meeting is, or that, in person, not public. Anyhow, I belabor the point, Amanda. I should stop talking and you should go.
Yeah, any questions before we go into the next section?
Oh, and this was the handy graphic that I forgot to move to, demonstrating what we talked about. All right, go ahead, Amanda.
Sure, let's go 2 slides forward. Okay, let's stop here. So you're familiar with this slide. We keep adding to this pyramid of indicators we considered, what we got data for, and what we've currently prioritized for inclusion in the draft scenario. I think we're at over 160. We've kind of documented and considered that you brought up, or that state agency staff brought up in the process of kind of exploring options for data after hearing from you what you might want to include. We had extensive conversations with the DEC, Department of State, Department of Health, Office of Housing and Community Renewal contributed to this effort. NYSERDA folks, including climate folks, contributed to this effort. We talked to people at FEMA, we talked to people at federal agencies. So we developed a pretty long list from all those discussions, and then tried to find things where we thought we could either get data at the census tract or calculate data at the census tract, got that data, and then kind of analyzed the quality, validity, and coverage of that data, as well as its overlap with other variables. So I would say we obtained data for over 90 different indicators, and some of it, the data quality or coverage wasn't there, like, missing different public transportation networks or things like that, which is on the documentation. So what I'm about to tee up is a big document that kind of shows all of these indicators that have been suggested and considered. And as Rosa said, kind of what the status is, if we were able to include them or not able to include them, and the reasons for not being able to include them. And that doesn't mean that they couldn't be considered in the future. In some cases, it looked like something that would need a lot of additional state work to get to the data at the point that it could be used. So I think what we tried to do is really document what we considered, so that the documentation doesn't only include what was selected, because I think it's hard for anyone, members of the public included, to see a list of just the 40 things that were included. And immediately it's natural to start seeing things like, what about this? What about this? And we want to provide a way for people to see that those were considered. So let's keep going here. And we also just want to recognize that the legislation does allow for at least annual review and update. So I think we've discussed this a little bit before, but our thinking was that the documentation could also include what you and the staff team may want to consider or improve in the future, to flag, okay, maybe we weren't able to get at this in this round, but we want to consider it in the future. And I think we are at the point that, we do have some things we might want to consider in the future, but we've done a ton of data work and data collection at this point, and we have, over 45 pretty solid data points, considering that, Cal and Viruscreen, I think, has 22. So we already have a lot of information. We've looked through a lot of things, and I think, I think we have covered, the essence of a lot of the discussions we've had, maybe just not as directly as possible if the ideal data were available. We also kind of want to recognize that, additional data needs may emerge from public comment. So also kind of thinking, okay, we're probably at the point that we can stop gathering data now, get this out as a draft and see what emerges from public comment, because that might reveal some additional data or variables that need to be collected. Chris or Rosa, do you want to say anything about, ideas for the annual update process?
I'll just add, this is Rosa, that, the legislation gives us the floor of you have to meet at least once annually to talk about the indicators and the areas identified, but we would prefer to work with the working group on what that meeting process looks like. Is it more than just one for the annual? So something that we will work with you on to make sure that we know that we're going to take a look at these indicators, update where the state is on I know we're going to include some recommendations for data improvement so that in future iterations, we could be using state collected information as opposed to in the instances where Amanda's going to go through where we've used federally collected data.
Thanks. And I see a few hands raised. I don't know if that was from the previous topic or this topic. Anyone want to chime in? Okay, great. Well, let's see what's on the next slide. Who's advancing the slides? Okay, great. Okay, so we're going to show you this big document that is, it's a lot of information. It has everything we think we've discussed so far. Of course, we might still have missed things. It has a big table for everything we've discussed, including things we included and things we weren't able to include at this time and why. We also added a special heat section specifically about heat vulnerability that gets into some of the indicators that are in New York and other heat vulnerability indices. And the specific indicators one might want to use to represent heat vulnerability, and then has a table explaining how the indicators in our proposed list of indicators relate to heat vulnerability. Because I know that is, of great interest, and I know we are, not able to include heat-related illness and heat-related deaths, which we discussed before would be something desirable, but not something we could provide at this time. So this document I'm going to show is an excerpt that will ultimately be part of the technical documentation. So we are marking it as a draft, something for this group to consider, but not something to distribute broadly at this point. It's really to help you prepare for and get comfortable for the vote before, thinking about whether those indicators, those 45, are what you'd like to see. So I think next steps coming out of this would be to review the document before the next meeting. You're welcome to provide written questions or comments if you like, to kind of let us know what you're thinking and where your head is for the next meeting, but we definitely will provide time in the next meeting to talk about it, and understanding that 1 week might not be enough time to get into this huge thing. As Rosa suggested on that first meeting in August, we expect to have even more time to talk about the considered indicators and make sure there's enough time, to discuss before trying to come to consensus. Any other questions so far? Okay. And I think, we've showed this framework a few times. We're kind of grouping the variables, the indicators, into these two overarching components, things that might be considered community burdens and potential risks, compared with things that might be considered population vulnerabilities. So community burdens and potential risks includes potential pollution exposures like air toxics. We have a pretty big category of what we're calling land use associated with historical discrimination or disinvestment, and we can change the terminology of any of these things. That includes redlining and proximity to a wide range of industrial facilities, remediation sites, and other types of facilities. And then a third category of potential climate change risks to meet that part of the legislation that talks about climate change vulnerability. And then on the right, on population vulnerabilities, that include socio-demographics, race, income, ethnicity, unemployment, renter status, health impacts and burdens, the health outcomes we do have data for, and then a third category of housing, mobility, and communications that includes things like housing costs and energy costs. So the document itself is kind of organized in this structure. And before I go to the document, I just want to reference in these slides, which you might want to use as you go through the document. Let's go 2 slides down. This slide and the next slide have the condensed list of the indicators currently under consideration from the draft. So about, 22 or 23 on the burden side, and a similar number on the vulnerability side. And these are also highlighted in the document. So I think at this point, let me pull up my screen. I don't see the sharing button enabled, so maybe something needs to happen. Okay.
I'll have the ball.
Hey, Amanda?
Okay, I think we have it.
Amanda?
Yeah.
A quick question before you move on. Do you know offhand, and thank you for all this, do you know offhand, I guess maybe the only other state that's done this is California. Do we know how many indicators they use and what their list of, how long their list of vulnerabilities? I was just wondering if you knew offhand. If not, that's fine.
They have 22 indicators in their current list. And we can certainly paste in their list of indicators at this point. I'm definitely more limited on the health side than our list.
And they're in the process of updating or revising their whole framework. Is that correct? Are they
They
adding more?
just published a major update, which was version 4, and they're just wrapping up, public comments on that. So I think, that might be it for a while.
All right, thank you.
And I think with their update, I don't really think they changed the methodology that much. They just really continue to deeply refine some of the indicators and really go deeply into different state sources and some more complex calculation methods, but they didn't change that much what the included indicators were. Great.
Anita, this is Jared Bly. Kind of a question, a follow-up question to that California process. Have you seen whether or not they have like removed or omitted any indicators, or have they only added to it?
They really have kept the number and the types of indicators fairly stable all the time. Over time, there might have been, one they added from update to update. But I mean, we could check, and compare the different versions. I think they haven't really made drastic changes over time. I mean, not even drastic, but I don't think they've really added or changed the list very much.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I'm just trying to think through how our own process would go, not only at this particular voting point, but future subsequent years. Thank you.
Thanks. So here is this document that we will share. It will be an excerpt. It is an excerpt, and it will be part of the longer technical documentation. It has the indicators that you've suggested, as well as indicators that the state agencies suggested, as well as some of the technical staff working on it. So we kind of frame this document as something produced by the state team for your consideration, and it would be part of the documentation. So this first part just copies the legislation. And then some of this is a repeat of what you've seen just, in text format as an example of what will be in the documentation, but it talks about this 2-part framework, which is really similar to California's framework. And I just want to note, the categorization, numerous indicators are relevant to multiple categories. Some could go in one box or the other. For organizational purposes, we're really listing them under a primary category. I would say that exactly how they're categorized does not affect whether they were considered for inclusion. It just affects kind of where they go in the scoring system.
Amanda, real quick question. Does it
Sure.
affect weighting? Like how they are weighted?
That's still TBD. Right now, we don't really have strong weights on many things. The only kind of weight we know we want is that the environmental exposures are weighted a little bit higher than things that might not have the same documented public health risks. And then there are potential to weight things on the other side. So it might, but it really depends on whether it would otherwise go into a category that might have different weights. But again, we're still, doing some sensitivity analysis around that, and I can't say if there will be very strong weighting. And I think another caveat here that we want to make sure we include is that the data used to represent these concepts should be considered potential indicators of burdens or risks or vulnerabilities. In some cases, there might not be a documented, published, peer-reviewed literature that links these indicators to negative community or public health outcomes. So some might have a causal linkage, but others might not. And we want to recognize that through the course of all of our discussions and your discussions as a working group, a lot of indicators have risen up as important that might not have the published literature behind them. And we have sought to include these because you know, the burden might be there, and also there might not be literature on it at this time, and just trying to represent what's meaningful and tangible to people. So with that, you know, that is why we have 45 indicators versus California having 22. We haven't really attempted to, you know, restrict them the same way. So really had what Alex calls the big tent approach of, you know, if there were strong or valid data and a strong theoretical reason for including them, we included them and haven't really tried to cut things out yet. That said, what that means when you do have 45 indicators, this is that every one indicator means and contributes a little less. So there is kind of a downside to continuing to add, in that you do end up kind of watering down what you already have.
Eddie, did you have a question? Your hand's up in the little side doohickey. Nope. Okay.
Okay. Let's see. This next section about indicator considerations is pretty much what we've been putting on a slide throughout. That should be, you know, a little bit familiar, but has a little bit more meat behind it for the final documentation. This section talks about the opportunities for future improvement in the annual update process. We understand that, you know, you haven't really had the time to fully discuss the annual review process and anticipate more discussions about this. In the meantime, we did include a column in these tables to potentially identify indicators that could be valuable to review or update during the first review process. I did, you know, keep the wish list relatively slim at this point, because I know as we go through public comment, as you review, we might get more and more input on those future considerations. And then just before we get into the tables, you know, this will, you know, be self-evident in the tables, but just kind of a README guide to the tables. They're organized by burdens and vulnerabilities, and then those 3 factors under each one. And then also we just tried to group them a little bit more. In some cases, for something like income, there might be 5 different ways to measure income, and might kind of group those together. Did I hear a question before we move on? Okay. And then this is kind of a guide to the other columns in the tables you see. So at this point, it's just a brief indicator description. These tables actually don't contain the method for calculating the metric. And there might be reviewers out there who really want to see exactly how the metric was calculated and how many meters away a facility might be, or whether it's distance weighted or something like that. And for all of the included indicators, that technical documentation definitely exists. The technical documentation will go into the detail of how a metric was calculated. We're happy to provide that at this phase if there's questions about that. It's just not included in this table. This table goes on to just say, you know, whether the data was available at the census tract level. Did we collect and analyze the data? So that middle step of the pyramid, did we at least get it to look at it? Among the data that we did collect and analyze, are we proposing using it in the draft scenarios? And then it goes on to say, what's the rationale for inclusion, which could actually apply to all the variables, even variables that we couldn't include. There might be very strong rationale for inclusion. So you're going to see this actually filled in for everything. You just might see a no for whether it was in the scenarios. And that is driven by what's in the column that says potential limitations. So in the potential limitations column, even for things that, you know, might have a strong rationale for inclusion, there might be a reason that we weren't able to or do not recommend pursuing that indicator. And in some cases it says it might not be just a data limitation, it might be simply that there's something better available. So multiple ways to measure something were provided, or multiple sources. For example, a federal, state, source and a state source. And for example, state technical staff might evaluate it and say, you know what, we think that the facilities, the remediation sites that we have on the state list are a more robust list than on the federal list. So we recommend using the state list. And I can show examples of that. And then we talked about this last column of whether it might be a priority for future work. Any questions so far before we scroll down and see giant tables? Okay, so let's look at one. Hopefully you have some zooming ability on your screen. So this first table is about, it's the burdens table. So the exposures, burdens, and climate change risks. So the first section is all of the pollution exposures. And this is the group that might possibly be given a higher weight for their kind of known relationships with negative public health effects, which is mentioned in the legislation. So you'll see, you do see some highlighting. Let's just see the non-highlighted. So there's plain white rows that aren't bolded or highlighted, and then there's bolded rows. And these are all bolded because they have a yes for proposed for the draft DAC scenario. So everything that's tinted or a little bit and bolded is part of that set of 45 variables. So you see in this section, we have PM 2.5, vehicle traffic density from EJ screen, benzene concentrations to measure outdoor air quality, a new variable that New York State agencies help create that's more specifically about diesel, truck, and bus, or truck and bus traffic that is more likely to produce diesel emissions. So that's kind of supplemental to vehicle traffic density. And it looks like that was it for the air toxics. And then it goes on to show for other potential air toxics, there is, for example, an EJ screen measure of diesel particulate matter concentrations. And there's reasons while this was available that the DEC preferred creating something that was more based on truck and bus traffic than this measure, which is a modeled measure. So similarly, you can see for other pollutants, formaldehyde, VOCs, ozone. I think we probably discussed these in the fall. It's kind of a blast from the past to see these again. So it does, still say, these are important. This is a known human carcinogen. VOCs are harmful, but it talks about limitations in getting data on it. Some EPA cautions against using census tract data from anything modeled by NATA. And then, for example, here, there's very limited monitoring on VOCs. So while important, we don't really have a good way to get a reliable census tract level estimate. So I'm just going to scroll down a little bit. We can circle back around to any of these after you've had a chance to look, or you can digest this on your own time. Here's water quality exposure. So here highlighting the indicator that that technical staff did think was a good measure, but recognizing the many other things that were suggested in the process. So definitely, an interest in including or considering impaired water bodies in the future, if that data is available. I know in different conversations in the past, we discussed, a fish consumption advisory or algal blooms, and there's discussion there of, recognition of why it's important here, and then discussion of what the limitations might be, like difficult to get at the census tract level. And then we get into this factor we're calling land use associated with historical discrimination or disinvestment. Very open to renaming any of these categories once you get in here. And this is where you see a lot of the different types of industrial or potentially hazardous facilities, remediation sites, potential chemical accident sites, power generation facilities, major oil storage facilities, and this is a new one. So this includes airports, military, and manufacturing. So we do have a way to kind of cover military bases and airports. Proximity to active landfills is new. Scrap metal processing and vehicle dismantlers is new. Municipal waste combustors. And then it talks about, for example, the state remediation site variable that we have above is a replacement for the EJ screen variable. So we still have a row recognizing that there is an EJ screen variable here, and then a discussion of why the state team wanted to create a state-specific variable from DEC data. Let's see, and then this section, which is still in that overall factor, leading with historical redlining scores, we do have that in the data set. We also have some data on industrial and mining and manufacturing areas, public utility and waste treatment areas. So this would be the land and the parcels and vacant housing units. And then on the climate side, we have tidally induced flooding, coastal and tidally influenced flooding, and then flooding in inland areas. These are both modeled or projected, matching with moderate emission scenarios for climate change. We also recognize there might be other climate change variables out there that might be based on past damage or past storms. And then here's a few things here that are also related to the heat island effect and extreme heat. So modeled or projected data on the number of high temperature days expected in 2050, I believe. Vegetative cover, which is part of many heat vulnerability indices, and agricultural land use. And we also recently added.
Amanda, interrupt you for just 1 sec. I see that, can you scroll up again where you just were a minute ago?
Mm-hmm.
In the extreme weather category, we ended up with nothing. Is that?
Well, we do have, the flooding and, areas
flooding
susceptible to flooding. A lot of that might be induced by extreme weather. We did really look at some of these FEMA indicators to determine if we thought they would be useful. But when we looked at them, it was kind of really reflective of past damage and not necessarily, they don't try to model to reflect climate change risk.
Okay.
There are also some other considerations in trying to repurpose the FEMA data for our purposes.
Another question, I guess. I noticed you have the category over there, the high priority for future data work. And I didn't start paying attention to that column until, I don't know, several pages in. And I haven't, once I started paying attention, I haven't seen anything that's checked there. Did I miss things, or is that just a column?
We're intentionally leaving that pretty blank for now. It would be easy to say these are all worth looking at in the future, but considering where the real priority and emphasis might need to be, we didn't want to put a stake in the ground on that pending your review and pending public comments. So that could be an area that you can contribute to.
Okay, sorry, I missed the conversation about that. This is, anyway, and while I'm at it, this is great, by the way. Thank you very much. Like, this is an easy way to look at this and kind of, well, maybe that's an overstatement. It's a lot easier to look at it this way than whatever that other spreadsheet was that we had a while back. So really appreciate you guys putting this together.
Thanks. Yeah, it's still a lot of information. I think our motivation for this was when we looked at the reams of public comments that California received on their first iterations of CalEnviroScreen. A lot of them were, did you consider this variable? Did you consider this variable? And we're sure that the technical team and and community contributors to that index did consider those, but there wasn't full documentation of this. And I don't know if anyone will read that before they comment, but we did want to try to put something in the ground that says, you know, we know there's a lot more out there and we did consider and try to find data on it. All right, so that kind of wraps up the burden side of things. Oh, and then we did, this is new to, we were able to calculate drive time to healthcare facilities to represent, you know, what an ambulance ride might be, an emergency trip might be in a extreme weather scenario. And yeah, you might see things like public transportation. I mean, it seems obvious that one would want to include public transportation. We did assess this and found that it looks like some transportation systems were missing. And, you know, didn't want to include something that represented some cities' public transportation, but didn't represent others, which might show that there is no public transportation in their areas. So, you know, similar walkability, you know, we really looked at this data. It is important, but found some anomalies in the actual values and decided that, you know, we have enough correlates with density and other attributes of the built environment that, you know, even though this is attractive because we want that concept, we don't want to include data that, you know, we're not really sure if it really represents what we want it to represent. And I could go on, you know, as you read through, you'll kind of see something, you know, different for every variable. Okay, so looking at population and health vulnerabilities, we get into sociodemographics, income, education, and employment. And I will say that, you know, generally we tried to find one variable to represent each concept, each burden or vulnerability. But income, there's so many different ways to measure income, and, you know, they're highly correlated, but not perfectly correlated. And here we thought it might be worth having maybe two measures of income, because you could have, you know, looking at households earning less than 80% of area median income, you could actually have the same value in two census tracts, but, you know, if a lot of households are earning less than area median income, you could still have very different poverty levels in those communities. So that's the reason for two here. Let's see, many other things considered. Race, ethnicity, and language. You know, we've talked about this a lot, really being limited by the categories that the census collects and the level of detail the census goes into. You know, census does include country of origin in their American community surveys, but those aren't the annual surveys, and those are based on really small samples. So we try to kind of restrict, you know, what we included for race, ethnicity, and language to things that might have more reliable data for them. All right, lots to look at there. Health, we talked about a lot last time, and what you'll see in these columns for health are really what was in our slides from last time that the DOH helped to write for us or with us. So asthma ED visits, COPD visits, myocardial infarction or heart attacks, premature deaths and low birth rate. These aren't incorporated yet, but we do intend to include them. They'll be in there soon. And population with a disability. And then we go on to talk about some of the other things that we talked about last time we were not able to find data on or can't include.
Amanda?
Sure, go ahead.
Sorry, quick question. I think I just saw, did you say there was no information found from DOH on heat-related hospitalizations, deaths? Like there's no, the state doesn't track that information?
Oh, okay, so that's a really good question. It's whether there's a data source at the census tract level. So there might be data, but it's not available at the census tract level. So we can highlight that and make that more clear. There certainly is county level or more aggregated data, but the issue is that, you know, it's not possible to kind of disaggregate it further. Oh, we'll kind of clarify that. But yeah, that's a good question. Really, this column is about not whether there's a data source, but whether there's something that we could use at the census tract level. And that, you know, that's discussed a little bit here too. They certainly do track ED visits, hospitalizations, and deaths, but they're too small to report at the sub-county level. Good question. Okay, and other health factors. And then a little bit here about housing. Some of these indicators were mentioned in the legislation about rented housing units, rent as a percent of income, energy affordability, manufactured and mobile homes we've discussed, internet access, and private vehicle ownership. I'm happy to circle back to those areas. I just want to give you a preview of this new heat vulnerability section that might be interesting to you. So we talked about, you know, what we did is we kind of looked at the literature and talked to public health experts on what the contributors to heat vulnerability might be, and really looked at, okay, what can we include? You know, we might not have a specific variable that's heat vulnerability, but we have as many of the attributes of the built or natural environment as well as social and health vulnerabilities in here as possible. So you can read that. And then what we have is this table that talks about what are the indicators associated with heat vulnerability based on all the literature, all the existing indices. Talked about, you know, there's so many factors and so many people who could have higher heat vulnerability: older adults, young children, lower income populations, people who work outside, etc. So we talked about, this table shows where this is mentioned as a potential component of heat vulnerability. So where is this documented that this is a factor? And then we talked about whether it's in the proposed indicator. So for example, older adults is directly included. We do have a variable for adults over age 65. Young children in general, we don't have a variable that's young children specifically, but we did include single parent households. And so then it goes on to say we did select single parent households rather than young children because the presence of children in general, you know, might not be a vulnerability in and of itself, whereas single parent households might have a stronger association with economic or mobility vulnerabilities as well. So there might have been a reason why, you know, for representing other factors like economic vulnerabilities or mobility or accessibility vulnerabilities, why we prefer a less direct measure that might also capture some of the vulnerabilities associated with urban heat island effects. And then this table goes on to show some of the geographic and environmental components of heat vulnerability as well. So covering high temperatures, land cover, housing density, heat absorptive or impervious surfaces, and air pollution. That was a lot. I'm happy to answer questions or zoom in on specific sections of this document if you want to talk through anything.
Maybe just real quick about the heat death thing again, or hospitalizations. I saw Sonal's comment in the chat about HIPAA, but I'm wondering maybe should that one be just tagged as a yes for future data? It would be good to have. It seems like not knowing that is a problem.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that's something like we just will never be able to overcome it ever, you know, in terms of the privacy concerns, but.
Yeah, we can certainly flag that as something to consider in the future. Mm-hmm. And yeah, you're right, it might not be possible, but it certainly sounds like a priority, so let's flag that.
And to Abby's point, just a note to our government colleagues. If you guys are seeing that there is certain just data sets that are not being collected, potential HIPAA violations aside, but if there are, if you guys are reacting to some of these data, these missing data sets the way we are, I urge you guys to go back to your sister agencies and the second floor, whoever else you guys gotta go to. I mean, it's just it's kind of nuts that there isn't there isn't better public information available from the State Department of Health when we talk about heat vulnerability. Given what just happened in the Northwest, like the time would be now, I would imagine, for the state to start, getting more serious about its heat vulnerability, both information disclosure as well as kind of, adaptation and mitigation responsibilities. I'll stop there, but it's just every once in a while I'll see something like this, and it's just I'm aghast, and I imagine that some of y'all may be feeling the same way.
And also, this is Sonal. I'd like to add just one comment reading this heat vulnerability piece, that it says New York City has programs to apply for free ACs or finding cooling centers. So the free AC through the city was a one-time program that operated last summer.
Okay.
That doesn't exist. Yeah, just a small point. The cooling centers definitely are there, but yeah, that program doesn't exist currently anymore.
Okay.
And it should. That would be great.
We'll remove that. Thank you.
I can send out DOH. I'm happy to send out things to information that is available that we put on our
Neil?
website. I mean, there is.
Neil, I'm so sorry. You're fading in and out, brother. I really want to hear what you're saying.
Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If it's helpful, Eddie, I could send around to Mander to send to the group links to the climate, weather, and health information that we do have available. I mean, there is heat stress information at the county level. I think, as Amanda mentioned, because we've mentioned before, in a lot of areas, we don't have the counts to show it at a sub-county level, which is why for the heat and vulnerability information, the data that we have put out, it's been more based on those vulnerability characteristics. In addition to that, there's a lot of messaging and summaries of some of the other things that have been going on. And so I encourage everyone to take a look at that, and certainly happy to discuss after you've had a chance to look at that where additional gaps may be.
Thanks, Neil. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I think also, just to add, I think this is one of those places where making note of, the future data to be tracked and what we can do, and try to, thread that needle. I mean, there's other things as well that we'd like to be able to gather, including more specific race and ethnicity data to look at things. And so we're going to flag those, but keep that in mind as you're reviewing, not just as a priority for next time, but also things that need to are likely to need a different data collection strategy than is currently in place.
And I'll just add too, I mean, we're all about trying to get data out at as fine a scale as possible, but we have to work within the constraints that exist, and we're doing the best we can to make it available where possible.
Can you remind me what was in there or not about vector-borne disease?
Let's see if we have that. I know we discussed that at some point. And if we don't have that in this table, we can go add that back. It looks like that did not make it into this version. Were there specific vector-borne diseases in mind, or just wanting to see a row
I think it would be helpful to think of it broadly, given that, you know, there are some indications that we will be seeing more and different diseases in the future. So being able to do a good job of tracking that now, you know, so we see that increase as it comes and are prepared for it.
Sure. Anyone else want to go to any sections of this document while we have it open? Okay, well, we will make just a couple of the changes we discussed today and probably send that out tomorrow for you to start looking at. Again, you know, open topic for discussion we can pick up on the 27th, but wouldn't expect you to make it through this whole document by next week. So let's see, we're at 10 minutes of 3. How are people doing?
Yeah, I was just going to say.
Amanda, I was going to suggest a break.
I think that sounds great.
So how about we do a 10-minute stretch break and we'll all come back here at 3 o'clock.
Great.
Thank you, guys.
All right, it's 3 o'clock and we are coming back to the meeting. Alex, if you're back on, do you want to get the PowerPoint back up? Do I have
Amanda,
to
can
switch
you?
the ball?
Yep, I need the ball.
Okay.
I don't know how to give you the ball.
It's a drag and drop
There you
thing.
go.
Woohoo!
You should have it.
Okay. I'm going to be sharing this nifty map. Can you all see the map? Is anyone back yet?
I can see it, and just want to remind everyone to stay on mute if you're not currently speaking, because we can hear some typing.
Okay, hello guys. I should say hello everyone. I'm just wondering if anyone's back yet because I don't see any pictures up yet.
I'm back. This is Rawa.
Thanks, Rawa. I appreciate it. You don't have to put your camera on. Okay, so I'm just going to assume everyone's back and you are all seeing the Tableau map thing that keeps showing you every time. But this time, what I'd really like to do is actually go through it with you, and we're just going to spend the next hour going through the map, talking through things. And every time we've done this, I should say, it's given us a huge amount of insight about what you're focusing on, what you're looking at, what you're questioning. And each time we've then been able to attenuate things a little bit. Go look for, the indicators that are going to be the most important in this. So we're kind of running on, getting all those indicators, QA/QCing them, looking at whether they're good or not, and then we're also then thinking about how do we combine them. All that stuff we've reviewed before, but the reality is like it's your insight that really helps with that. So what I would like to do is to take some time going through the maps with you in this next hour, and then through that discussion, a lot is going to emerge for our team that we need to hear as far as like, well, you're looking at highways and you're looking at this and why is this community not designated a DAC in this very drafty scenario as opposed to this other one. So I'd like to ask for a volunteer to take us to a special spot in New York, and we can go there and start talking.
We can go to Malone, New York.
Okay. Malone,
New
York. Woohoo! Okay. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit because, well, actually, no, let's zoom in. There's only one census tract around here. So I'm just going to zoom in so we can look at this one. None of these are designated a DAC. But I am going to, zoom out a little bit and select the tracks that are around here so that we can get some information about those. Come on. So we've got these tracks. Is there, were you expecting to see this as a DAC or one of these?
I just wanted to go up there because we've always gone down to the city for these exercises. We can move over to a location that has a DAC if that would make this particular exercise easier or more enlightening.
Well, no, I mean, there's validity in talking about what we're looking for here. So this area is 74% of this this census tract. So 74% of the block groups inside here, census blocks, are considered a PIJA. And, they have a high vulnerability percentile or higher and low income. So if it's kind of up to that point of saying, does this send a flag up to you? And is there something that we should consider? Clearly, this is the one that has the lowest income of the group of these three that we see here. Jared, are we going to say that this should be?
I'm not comfortable commenting on that at this point because we haven't been able to do the ground truthing with my team. But I wanted to offer that up as just a different place in the state to look.
I appreciate that. Is there another one you'd like to look at?
Before we go somewhere else, can I ask a question?
Totally.
So when I was doing this exercise, looking at the burden score and the vulnerability score, I had trouble like translating that into anything meaning like it was hard for me to just understand. Like, I mean, looking at the median income here, I would think, whoa, okay, maybe that should be a DAC. But then it's hard to kind of reconcile that with the other numbers and how that all evens out or whatever. So
yeah. One of the things we did with the percentile, we actually converted these to percentiles. So when you see these now, the percentiles are, it tells you something that you can compare to. We put these scores right here for the kind of average percentile. So, there's, for the Statsy people, there's a little bit of skew here, right? Because there's 58th percentile is the average percentile for the burden score. And the vulnerability score, 57, is the average one. So if we're comparing on this track, this particular one, and we see 41 and 64, you can see that on the burden side, they're not as burdened environmentally with all the things that we have in that score and that subscore. On the vulnerability side, they're slightly higher, but not extremely higher, even though the income is lower.
And let me just dig into this a little. I think I get it and appreciate that explanation. And so both the percent BIPOC and the median income is within the vulnerability score, right?
It is.
Okay. And the red line, if available, would also be in the vulnerability score?
I think that's in the burden score. Amanda, can you confirm that? Because we moved that one around. Amanda, you there?
Sorry, I was on mute. What variable?
The red line score.
That's on the burdens side in that middle factor about land use associated with historical discrimination or disinvestment.
Right.
And it is a score that's only really there for larger cities. So totally not informing that on this one, but there are other things that are informing it, right? So if you think about painting a house, when you start putting coats on, you're kind of covering things with multiple indicators in this case.
Yeah.
One of the things, what we didn't want to do is inundate you with like every single indicator because there's 45 of them at this point to show like this is where this one stands. We can do that to a certain extent, but the reality is that there's, the subscores that kind of influence things, and because each individual indicator correlates and is related to a lot of other ones inside, no one thing, including redline, is going to tip anything overboard. I can say that with pretty good certainty, but we are also doing a sensitivity analysis to see that.
And yeah, this is such a great example of where ground truthing helps. It sounds like here this census tract does have fairly low median income, but also has low BIPOC score and a low burden percentile. So it might be that in our current scheme that, you know, has fairly balanced variable weights and fairly balanced factor weights, income isn't exerting as strong of an influence as you might like. So the more tracks you rank, maybe we could begin to see a story, you know, maybe there's a trend where some of the tracks you ground truth as wanting to be classified tend to have lower incomes, but might not have, you know, the high percentiles on other things.
I would actually love to hear from my fellow working group members on this if possible, you know, because I know when I was going through it, there were some examples from our region that were like that, where incomes were very low, but they weren't classified as DAX. And that was concerning for me, just because when I think about, you know, the ability for people to respond to climate impacts and, you know, and take proactive measures to, you know, be part of the clean energy economy, it seems like just having the money to be able to do that is such a critical factor. So when I was going through it, what kind of was bubbling up for me was, does income need to be weighted more heavily? But would really like to hear from others about their thoughts on that.
Hey, Abby, it's Eddie. I'm not sure. It might be helpful to get a sense of what the potential choice is, potential choice before us. I will tell you, like historically, politically, you know, contextually, the environmental and climate justice movements, you know, have always said that yeah, race is a key construct, but that of course low income is, you know, low income communities that are, you know, similarly burdened and neglected, you know, even if they're, you know, if they're white communities, but if they're low income, you know, people, you know, our movements have considered these communities to be EJCJ. So, you know, folks in Appalachia, right? Like there are groups in active in that part of those regions that have been active leaders in some of our national movements. So, but I guess my question is, if we're talking specifically, how does that get captured in the DAC designation? It would be helpful to have a little more clarity of what is the choice, like what is the balance that we should be, like what are the options, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. Sorry if I'm being a little inarticulate.
Oh, that was very articulate. And I think that it's right now what we have done is taken all of the kind of indicators that go into the bucket with income and given them equal weight. And so one of the things I'm hearing here is that there might be something where, again, like Amanda said, like we weight income higher so that we're capturing this. And it's always in balance with everything else that we're trying to capture as well. So this is, again, where the ground truthing goes, because I think the reality is what we're trying to build is different from just saying, well, what about that one indicator? Trying to understand it is like, when you go to this area, and Jared, when your staff go to this area, is it impacted? Do you see issues that could be addressed if we designate this a DAC? And if so, then we need to know that, because then we can change the recipe of things that we do to make it a DAC. And
you know, I appreciate that. And really the reason I wanted to highlight this community as an example is just to kind of facilitate this discussion with our downstate counterparts, because, you know, a lot of the rural communities in North Country, rural New York, you know, I've been struggling with exactly how do we designate, because there's a lot of these factors at play that I don't quite have a great grasp on. And then there's always the context of discussions about how this compares to other parts of the state. We just haven't really had much of a conversation about more rural communities. So I wanted to bring it up, and I certainly appreciate the other group members weighing in on this. And I feel that they have just as much, I wouldn't say confusion, but just questions and concerns. They share the same that I do about this process. Just trying to understand it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a hard process in that way, and it feels like very confusing. What we're asking you to do is kind of ignore the, wait, what if we tinkered with this one indicator and tried to make this here, mostly because there's a broader picture that's happening. And in this case, this is an excellent example of it. Income's low and it's clearly got an impact to it. But then we have this whole burden burden score with a lot of environmental impacts. And it looks like this community, even if it's low income, is not going to be as environmentally impacted as others, or is not currently and may not in the future be. So if that's the case, then it's an issue of prioritization and something to talk through of what are the relative weights that we need to do. And what I'm hearing is that income is a very, very important indicator, because if the median income is $31,000, as Abby says, they're not going to have the resilience, the ability to respond to when climate change happens, even if this is, even if this is, I've lost my train of thought. Even if this is a DAC or not at this point, we need to kind of see whether, what is the critical issue in this case.
Right. So I just wanted to, I guess, challenge the framework that we're operating under with this particular example to see how, I'm not saying that we need to tweak the process to make things fit, but at least challenging it early on to see if it's robust enough to account for all these variabilities throughout the state.
Yeah, and one of the way that we've tried to account with that is the cake and eat it too scenario, where, if we had just let it be kind of full statewide scenario, a lot of the DACs would end up being in New York City. What we've tried to do is kind of just allow for both of those, so that all those tracks in New York City are still there, but then there's still the ones outside of New York City that get called to it. But I will tell you this, that most of the environmental burdens that are out there are things that are associated with less rural places, so more cities,
right.
Which is, I will say, directly the opposite of what California's models did, because they had all this heat and drought and things like that, which is not the same or true for New York State. So while most of their DACs were rural, most of the DACs in New York State are city DACs. So yeah, it's worthy of a conversation. And I'm actually, just so that we capture this thing, is like, I'm just going to put Alex from group meeting that we says like flag how /weather. I can't spell when I'm being watched by lots of people. Flag how whether this should be a DAC.
I think, Alex, if it just as an example, we really want to capture the idea of income here. So we want to know exactly what is shouting to you that this should be a DAC. So tell us so we can begin to see that trend. If we see a lot of comments that I think this should be a DAC, this is low income, I don't understand why that's not a DAC if it's not low income. So try to get that in the explanation.
When your staff get there, Jared. Not
okay.
Right now.
And I'll just add that when I was doing these, within the city of Rochester, there were some that were a DAC that had much higher income, not like higher than the median income for the state, but, comparing census tracts within the city of Rochester, the range of income was pretty huge that was included, which made I think I sent you guys an email, but it almost seemed like we needed 2 tiers of DACs, which I know is probably like something we don't even want to touch, go down that. But it's like these communities are just so not dealing with the same kind of reality, and mainly just because of the income level. And although, historically they may have both been redlined, they're just not the same today. So, that was just
Well, you got two concepts there that really bring a lot out to me. So I'd love to hear others talk about this too and what they think about it. Amanda and I have floated around the idea that there has to be maybe a cutoff. So any census tract that is below a certain median income should be a DAC kind of idea. Is that a valid approach or not? That's something that we should discuss and talk through right now. The other part of this is also, Abby, I think, don't want us to try to create a two-tiered system this time around, but that's certainly not something that should be off the table for future iterations of this work, because we're trying to capture, like the leave no DAC behind, we're trying to capture with the spirit of EJ to get everything that we can, but at the same time, there's also limited funding. So how do we balance that kind of component? And I would love to build a system where we're really thoughtfully bringing that out, but I don't know if it's something that we can do yet, because we have to kind of learn and figure out how to even get just a simple, yes, no here before we try to iterate on the other part.
So Alex, want to click on one of those tracks near the airport? I just want to try to see, what's going on here.
I'm going to highlight.
Try to find. So yeah, so some of these are definitely higher median income. But look like in this case, one with $89,000 median income. It'd be good to see what that specific one is. Does have a low vulnerability score for other reasons. And these burden percentiles are really in the middle range. So kind of probably recognizing that there are a number of different types of facilities nearby that were previously or currently potential burdens or hazards.
Hey, it's Eddie. It's hard not to have this conversation without, on some level, waxing a little philosophical. So I'd like to go there in a second. But before I do that, a quick question, and apologies if I should know this, and I'm just in a brain fog here. But when we talk about median income, right? Are we talking about median income for the state, or are we adjusting for local? Let me just put it this way, right? If we're talking about, let's say we're talking about median income for the state of New York, let's say your family makes, I don't know, $30,000 a year. Unless I'm mistaken, I would imagine that $30,000 a year upstate carries you a lot further than $30,000 in the city of New York, right? So I'm just wondering, like, are we accounting for those kind of regional cost of living, in some cases dramatic differences? Because I'm a little concerned that if we're applying a one-size-fits-all median income for the state of New York, it's just not the lived economic reality of folks.
Yeah.
So how are we adjusting for those differences in cost of living, not just income, for the different parts of the state?
Yes, great questions, great point, and ties well into the considered indicators document. So the median income that we show here is really to illustrate what's in these tracks with an easier, tangible takeaway if everyone kind of knows what this income range might be in this region or statewide. In the scenarios itself and the tool itself, we're not using this median income score. We're using two income measures. So we're using the percent of the tract that's below 80% of area median income, where area median income, that metric does reflect local norms and local conditions. And then we also have another variable that is percent below the federal poverty line. And because that's a federal line, you will have, that doesn't have the area median effect. But that's why we do have two variables in there. And we do have one that's less than 80% area median income, which we decided because there's other programs that use less than 80% of area median income as a measure. And then thinking about housing costs, rental burden, let me just get into, to remind myself, that gets into, so that gets into some of the housing related variables. And we have the percent of the population who are renters, and rent as a percent of income as well as energy affordability. So those are other ways rent as a percent of income that of kind of being indexed to local conditions a little bit more.
And I'm going to just add to that, Eddie, one of the things that we discussed very early on, Amanda and I debated back and forth on, there are a lot of indices out there, a lot of statistics would be like, you know, the burden ones. And I think California actually has a bunch of these indices as kind of their main indicators. One of the things that we took issue with on some of this is that, not that California was doing it badly, they're doing it great, but one of the things that we wanted to do was have a lot of transparency about what we were including and why. And so what we did was take the philosophical and theoretical backings of what creates that kind of vulnerability, and included the, you know, basic scores into the model as opposed to creating something and, you know, gluing it all up together. And we did that, you know, for the reason of transparency, so that Amanda could basically say that, you know, we've got income, but we've got rent, you know, the percent of renters, and then we have the percent of, you know, that of your income that you pay for rent. All of those have, you know, a lot that informs what you're talking about, which is an economic kind of vulnerability.
And then, you know, we have, so that's the variable level stuff. And then, you know, our other strategy is to have the two-part scoring system where you can be a DAC if you rank in the top, you know, range of a statewide score, or if you rank in the top range of either the New York City regional score or the New York State regional score. So that's, again, another opportunity to have things possibly, you know, not perfectly. It's still, the rest of the state is a very diverse area, but another opportunity to be compared against more like communities, hopefully.
So one of the things, Abby, that I think what you were pointing to, that would be very useful for us, and I'm sorry that it didn't work, by the way, the tool does work, but you have to make sure that your pop-up blocker is off. Then it should work. But irrespective of that, the information you gave us, Abby, was really helpful to know, like, oh, okay, we're getting it kind of weirdly wrong in some places. So there are some things that we need to emphasize more than others. Like to the point where, you know, there's some higher income, say this is a median income of 67,000, and that their burden percentile is higher though, but you know, still kind of within that median range. So why are they a DAC, and why is, say, let's go over here, try to find a lower income. Oh, this is not helping. Here we go.
Go up.
This one or here?
No, I said go up north, but anyway,
oh,
go
okay.
ahead.
We can go up here. Yeah. Why is this not? Or why is, help me here. Why
We'll
is
go
this
more
not?
into the orange areas. Yeah. Just.
Yeah. So, and I think that is a valid thing. So what we can do then is start looking at when we know that from you and say like, why is this not a DAC? And just say flag, you know, flag. Why is this not a DAC? Just wondering. You know,
Well,
we get that information, it then lets us be able to kind of compare and contrast across all the information that we have. But Amanda, you wanted to say something?
No, that's great.
And I really appreciate, Eddie, you raising that, because I think that the one that you had over there, kind of near the airport, right above the airport, that one. Why is that a DAC? I'd label that, why is that a DAC?
Yeah, okay. Why is this a DAC?
And then, yeah, I think why don't you think it should be a DAC? That's what, before you hit submit, Alex, we really want to see in those comments. We want your local knowledge, you know, just wondering because it looks this way, or because this is high income, something like that. To give us some clue of what indicator are we potentially talking about, what element of our approach are we potentially talking about here?
So yes, income. And as Eddie said, like $67,000 in Rochester, you can live fairly handsomely.
Yep. So This is exactly what I wanted. Thank you guys.
And just one last little waxing philosophical thing. I just want I think every once in a while we overlook this or forget this. This whole DAC Climate Justice Working Group mandate, all of it is designed to come up with a system where we are figuring out how 35 to 40% of clean energy funds gets prioritized for these communities. That means most of the money, 60 to 65%, is still available for the rest of the state, right? So, like, let's not, I just want to make sure that folks understand that we don't, the pressure isn't like if you're a DAC thing, if you're not a DAC, you're missing the boat. No, you've got the rest of the boat is still there. Like we're just trying to organize the lifeboats. You know, that's like, I just want folks to understand. Like it don't feel like. Anyway, so having said that, just one other thing, I think that the way a lot of us philosophically have looked at the issues of you know, disadvantage, a disadvantaged system. A lot of us have looked at both race and class, right? And in those parts of the country, those parts of the state where you don't have a lot of people of color, the disparities, the disadvantages then play out along income lines, right? So, you know, I don't know how to address or fix that necessarily, because a lot of as we can see, as we tease out and get deeper into these economic questions, it becomes complicated. It becomes complicated about what's poor where for who and like all that stuff, right? But putting that aside, I just think that I don't know if 2 tiers is the right way to go either. But it could be that there are places where income almost becomes for a lot of other reasons it's not, but almost becomes a little bit of a proxy for race, right? Because disadvantage at the end of the day is about, you know, who's got the power and the influence not to be disadvantaged, right? That's what makes you disadvantaged at bottom, is that you don't have the political, economic, and other tools to even the playing field with advantaged communities. So I don't know the answer to this, and I think that's why we adopted this No DAC Left Behind, because of that context. But I think it is important to note that there may be other ways of capturing, even if something ends up on the non-DAC side of things. But let me stop there, because I really would love to hear what some of the other working group members have to say about this.
Just gonna say this perfectly plays out if I scroll over these two, or if I just highlight these two areas. So I'm gonna highlight, come on Alex, do this. There you go, these 3 areas. And we look at 2 DACs, but like they're very different. So what makes that drive? Why is this DAC a DAC as opposed to this very legitimate DAC right here? Which is, I think, what we're trying to get at. So I feel like, yeah, this is very clearly incorrect. And knowing that it's higher income and trying to figure out what is driving this is our job to do. And then coming back and addressing that and saying like, okay, so I remember this one and it was very high income. It was a DAC for this reason, and this is what was pushing it over the edge, in so much as what we can give you as far as information on that. But now we tweaked it so that it's no longer a DAC, and we're kind of confining it a little bit more and emphasizing income a little bit more in this way. And that now the map's changed, and it changes everywhere because of that. Abby, should this one be a DAC?
I am trying to orient myself. Oh, no, probably not. No.
Okay. Because the income is low. Median income is 36,000.
Oh, and that might have been one of the ones actually in the email that I sent you that I was surprised, actually. Okay. Oh, no, there's North Goodman. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm like, where are we in the city?
University Avenue, Atlantic Avenue, coming in to a point.
Yeah, not compellingly DAC anyhow, compared to other parts of the city, right? And that's where you get to like.
Yeah. And so this is where the stats just don't get us as far as the parts that you can give us. I know this is hard, and I know it's like we want to get to the place where we're like, well, the numbers all make sense and this feels right. But the reality is that the whole part of, and I think the benefit to having you all here helping us is to make sure that we don't just use the data as they flow with the theory, because that's what you're seeing here is just the data as they flow with a kind of a very sound theory. So this is something we need to talk through. Can I stop talking? Any comments, thoughts?
Alex, I just had a question. This is Rawa. I've been struggling to use the map. I think there's just something wrong. I don't know if it's my computer or what, but it doesn't, it's more of a technical difficulty trying to access the tool. And I don't know what to do about that or where I can get some technical support.
Yeah, we can work with you. I can either have Matt or Amanda meet with you and we can go through the map together, or we can meet with you and try to fix it.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, that goes for everyone of the working group members. We really, I know you're busy, and so this is why we thought having this open conversation about like, hey, look, this is what we're seeing in this part of the map, and let's go to another, and are we seeing the same thing, is really helpful. But doing it on your own time, if you have the time, is fabulous as well.
Alex, can you remind me with the red line score, is a higher number better or the lower number better?
Depends on what you think of as better. Lower number is less redlining occurred.
Lower numbers, okay.
So the higher number is the more likelihood to have been redlined and therefore will be more likely to be a DAC. Okay, we're gonna go to the city now, unless we want to go to Buffalo or jump around. Where shall I go in the city?
Somebody else from New York City offer a neighborhood, unless I'm disadvantaged here and I'm the only New York City person. I know there are a couple of other you guys.
What about Inwood?
We go to Inwood.
Inwood in New York City. I think there's another Inwood as well. That gets confusing.
Okay, let me see if I can try to find Inwood. Okay, there's only going to come up with, yeah.
It's just on the tip of Manhattan.
Okay, so let me see if I can grab it. Manhattan being over here. Tip right up here?
Yep.
I can scroll in a little bit more, try to get that.
Yeah, and just a little bit north, and then you're there. Yeah, there you go.
There we go. If it doesn't have a color, there's too small of a population. We've kind of noted that before, but I just want to make note we have a plan for that that we're still working out.
That's just like an athletic center. So I think actually nobody lives, I don't think anyone lives there.
It doesn't look like anyone lives there. Wow, yeah, so we got some differences here. One thing you'll notice in the city scores, the burden percentile is much higher. Vulnerability percentile is also higher than when they're non-DACs.
Thanks for saying that, Alex. I think every once in a while, people forget that when we're talking about disadvantage in this context, the overarching criteria is burdens, environmental burdens, and vulnerabilities. And so, like, you know, disadvantage can be on some level in the eye of the beholder, but in this case, it's you know, we're talking about burdens, and we're talking environmental burdens and climate vulnerabilities. I just want to remind folks, not on the working group, because I know you all know this, but the rest of the folks who are listening in on this conversation.
Sonal, does this look right to you?
It looks pretty right to me. Yeah. It
I'm
does.
just gonna go a little bit higher up.
I can't speak to that part. But
Okay,
maybe someone else can.
I'll move down. It's all good. What I'm hearing though is, you know, like, so this is why we have two models, one for New York City and one for the rest of the state, and why we've kind of added them together. And I think that it's important to kind of keep that in mind and remember that, so that that is the cake and eat it too model, so that we're not leaving DACs behind in New York City while we're still trying to make sure that there are DACs outside of New York City. So that takes us to, I think it's 34% or 33% of all of the census tracts are DACs at this point. So I just want to make that known. Okay, I'm going to take us to another spot. It's going to be, let's go
Go to Queens. We haven't shown Queens any love.
Okay, Queens it is.
Jackson Heights.
Jackson Heights. Well, are we going there? Jackson Heights. I can't spell it, but why can I not get there? Queens.
Well, that's real disadvantage if you don't even show up on the map.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think it's just Tableau.
So. We are the disadvantaged and unmapped of the world. This is not good.
Yeah, tell me where to zoom, because I want to make sure we're hitting a specific spot, and I can't see it from here. So maybe I'll start zooming, and you can tell me where to go after that.
See where the green right in the middle, that big stretch of green?
This guy right here?
Yeah, I think to the left.
Okay, to the left of that right there. Okay.
That's I can do. And folks who know Queens, if I'm totally misleading Alex, please let them know.
It is really good to always see the boundaries of these and how they're moving. In this case, you know, it's interesting that this is a DAC. This one is not. So I'm going to highlight a couple places.
I think it's a little more north. I think this is Bushwick. Which is not a bad place to also look. I mean,
yeah, let's stay there.
Well, let's go down, because I'm curious about this one thing. If we're looking at just these, let's see, these ones right here, they're all under the PJA, every single one of them. The income for two of these right here is really, really similar. The vulnerability score, or this is weird. This is higher, but yet the non-DAC. I think we found a bug, guys.
Uh-oh.
There's just so many variables. This is what's tricky when we have so many. It did have a slightly lower burden percentile, but yeah.
But slightly lower burden.
I mean, do we think this should be a DAC, or is it reasonable that it is not? What is the thought here?
Well, but Bushwick is one of these neighborhoods that have been the gentrification has been spiking, but it's been, you know, the gentrification has been ongoing for at least 10 years, and it's weird because Bushwick is also one of these communities that is cheek to jowl next to one of the biggest remaining manufacturing zones in the city. So unless we know exactly, if there's any way to zoom in, we know better. But yeah, but Bushwick presents in many, it's almost a model case study for how gentrification can skew some of these neighborhood profiles.
Okay, great. No, that's exactly the type of comment we'd want to hear, and that explanation of this area has experienced, rapid gentrification and it's also near manufacturing areas. So, and then say, so I think, they should all be taxed or whatever you want to think, but give us those keywords of gentrification and manufacturing and we can kind of look at what, any of these 45 layers are saying about those issues.
Yeah, so I find this a fascinating comparison, these two, because that burden percentile you can start seeing in the model that we currently have, even though this vulnerability percentile is higher for the New York City model, the burden percentile is the one that has a bit more leverage here. So it's the indicators and the combination of things that has more leverage as opposed to the other, and then the income being just a little bit lower because the vulnerability is there. So I find that interesting because everything else is basically the same. And so this tells us something's up here. And so we will look at the manufacturing, we'll look at the burden scores and start seeing where the slight differences is. If the manufacturing is over here and impacting this is slightly higher than this one, then that could be what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any way to switch to the real banging map that has the actual, or the Google Earth or the whatever, the feature that actually zooms in on the neighborhood so we can physically see it?
Oh yeah, we can totally physically see this neighborhood. It just has a little bit of a color over it, but so one of the things that we can do is kind of like move this around and see what looks like, at a park, big parking lot, but that looks, is that housing, is that not? They look pretty similar to me though.
Yeah, it's a slight income and vulnerability difference.
So what this tells me,
i.e. gentrified Bushwick.
yeah, but I do think that this is telling to me in some ways that the manufacturing, like, so what the way that a lot of that is calculated is the space, or is it the distance, Amanda, between the manufacturing places and the rest of, so in that case, it just might be a little further south from something, a little further away.
Yeah.
And so that's lifting this one out. And it also tells me that these are all on the kind of crux, right? The balance point of whether it is a tax versus not.
And I mean, there's so many things happening here. Road density and road traffic being higher, closer to Broadway. Things are really looking at the volume of vehicle traffic, both vehicle traffic and truck traffic. So that could be playing a role too.
Hey, Amanda, could you hold it on the non-DAC part of Bushwick? I'm just jotting down this track so I can look at it later when you guys forward this back to us.
Yeah.
We've got members and staff that live in Bushwick, so I'm gonna run this by them.
Yeah.
They're gonna tell me that's where the Starbucks is.
I think gentrification though is really tricky, and it's hard because the income data might reflect higher income, and they're really, we did try to think creatively of ways to represent gentrification, and it is hard if something has been fully gentrified. And then the question of what, how can we tell whether it's gentrified to the point that it should not be receiving resources anymore, or whether who's the remaining population that should be considered a disadvantaged community, and how do we find that in the data sets we have?
Can I ask an economics question? And I don't know if you guys have and I'm probably going to butcher the question, but in a particular census tract, if you have a handful of people that are making a lot more money, can that in of itself kind of screw up the whole? Because one of the things I know about, it won't. Okay, because one of the things I've learned about, or I've heard about Bushwick, is that part of the reason why gentrification has been significant, but not all in. Like there are neighborhoods that have just gotten gentrified, wiped out in New York City, right? But those neighborhoods that still have some rent stabilized housing stock have been able to resist those. And I've seen parts of Brooklyn where you've got the rent stabilized, you've got public housing, and then you've got really high. I'm not talking about middle income. I'm talking about people with a lot of money, and not a lot of them who go into the neighborhood. So I'm just wondering if a small number of high income individuals can somehow give a skewed sense of.
They won't here. That's one of the reasons why people use median for income instead of mean or the average income. And in this case, it's really vital to do that because if you think of like that, beautiful bell curve, that's never what income actually looks like. It's always got that crazy, the really, really rich people. And if you took the mean, you would kind of push out that number and it would be biased. But the median is basically like taking all of those data points. So say like if we took a stab of everyone here on this call, and I'm counting 1, 2, 3, like 4, so 12, 13 of us, and I got incomes for everyone here, I would just count to the 6th one and get that income if I ordered them from like lowest to highest. And that's what median is. It's like the direct middle count. And it's not biased by the crazy income, high income one. And that's why it's always used and it should always be used. So if someone's using mean income, they're going to really mess with models. But median in this case is there. That's one of the things behind the scenes. We've been looking at the distributions of everything. And in that crazy PDF that we sent you months ago, you have these different graphs. And part of those graphs are there to tell us, oh, this is a really what we call skewed point. And so we need to figure out a way to make it not skewed, or are we okay with the skew? Like, what are the things there? And looking at every single one of those. It's a good question. I'm going to go north now, and we only have 9 minutes. This may not be feeling really useful in decision making wise, but it's extremely useful to Amanda and me because these conversations are exactly what we need to be looking at and being like, okay, income really should be looked at this way. And I think for New York City, it's going to look different than it is in the rest of the state. So this is very helpful. Okay, we're in Queens now. Tell me what you see, and I can zoom in a little bit more and we can kind of compare and contrast a couple little places. Oh, come on. Wrong. Ah! I'm having a tech thing. Okay. So we've got these two areas that one is a DAC and one is a DAC right here. One is not. One is not, one is, one not. So anybody here have a feel for why they could be different or not, or whether that is right or wrong? And just really quickly, I'm going to highlight these 4 so that we can see the differences down here. Similar.
Can you zoom out a little bit, even with those highlighted?
Yeah.
So people can see streets. Okay.
In this case, you can start seeing that the 2 DACs have, let's see here, higher vulnerability scores, higher percent BIPOC, not totally though. And that we're not even capturing for this non-DAC right here, the percent PIJA. So this one right here. Anybody from Queens want to speak up? I'm going to zoom back in so they can see this area.
Hey, sorry, Alex. I just by looking at this map, it's impossible for me to know what part of Queens this is. I don't know if anybody else is. Maybe we should go to another borough that folks know a little bit more. Bronx or Brooklyn?
Let's try Brooklyn.
If you want to see like gentrification in all its glory, go to Red Hook.
Red Hook.
Oh no, not
No.
Red Hook, Brooklyn, not New York.
This is what happens when you try to use map shortcuts. Okay. You're gonna have to tell me where to zoom in because I too can't tell exactly.
Okay. It's hard to tell you how to direct it. There's a little peninsula that sticks out on the southern, but actually should be right across from those. Can we see the Brooklyn Bridge? It's like down the road down the coastline from the Brooklyn Bridge.
Having not Brooklyn Bridge, Alex. Having a moment where I feel like.
You see where it says Battery Tunnel?
Yeah.
That exit, that's Red Hook.
Okay. So this is Battery Tunnel, right? Oh no, that's Holland Tunnel.
Yeah, Battery Tunnel.
There we go. Red Hook.
There you go.
Found it.
I'm assuming you're going to see kind of horseshoe shape, where public housing is definitely like the historical Red Hook DAC, and surrounding that, it should be massively gentrified. So are we seeing, is that what it's looking at? Is it looking like a horseshoe a little bit?
Yeah, let me zoom out a little bit and see. So if you're looking at Red Hook here, that it goes around.
No, see, so Red Hook is all, Red Hook appears to be the entire community and non-DAC, which shouldn't be.
All of this?
Yeah, it's public housing. You got to zoom in closer.
Okay, let me zoom in. And it could be that at the census tract level, this might be a hard one.
Oh, yeah, maybe, yeah.
Because let's see here. I don't know why this isn't showing up on income, but if you look at this one right here, we've got 171,000 on the median income.
Mm-hmm.
The burden percentile is huge. Vulnerability is lower. And then we've got really high income again. Really high income.
I'm not sure if what you're looking at is, like Gowanus is a perfect example. Like it's a Superfund site surrounded by market rate housing.
Oh man. Okay.
And then it's hard to tell from this map if that's Gowanus, if that's Red Hook. I think you're looking at the Borum Hill neighborhood, which surrounds the Gowanus Canal.
I'll come down here. Yeah. This is just huge income.
Yeah,
I think that's something for us to look at.
Yeah, I don't think we're finding the name. And I'm sorry, I don't want to.
Yeah.
I know we got a little bit of time, so I don't want to keep.
No, it's okay.
Taking everyone's time. Yeah, I don't think we can see it right now. So.
Okay. Well, I'm going to stop sharing because I want to see all you all and talk through kind of next steps for us and what we want to be talking through. One is, so Amanda, we're going to try to get the document that you went over. When do you foresee us being able to send that out? We're trying to work on, making a few edits and then sending it out as soon as possible. What's the estimate, do you think, for that?
Yeah, we'll send that end of day today, but do want to update a few things based on today's discussion.
So probably not 5 o'clock Eastern time, but maybe a little bit after that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we will work on that. And what the information that you just talked to us about, thank you for that. I really, really appreciate it. What that will let us do is start trying to wrangle the sensitivity around income and other different indicators, both within New York City and then outside for the rest of the state, and try to balance those out and see, given the specific tracks that we looked at, how we can kind of leverage or push things around so that they're more accurate. Again, this is the nuance that is really, really, really hard, but also I think pretty vital, because you can't just rely on the theory. And even if you try to throw even more data points or anything like this, it's not going to help. We have to try to figure out what combination or what exact number or quantity in a recipe do we need to make it right? So for the next meeting on the 27th, we will update this one scenario and go through it again with you, and then we'll also kind of respond to comments and thoughts that you have on the indicator document. Is there anything else, Rosa, I am missing?
Great, thank you, Alex. And the one last reminder as we try to pin down our timeline moving forward is if you haven't indicated your availability for August, please do so today. And the other thing we'll follow up with is with Sarah and the timeline with the Climate Action Council. So thank you everyone for the long 3 hours today, and we'll see you soon.
Yes, thank you everyone.
Thanks everybody. Have a good day.